Stop scrolling. A viral clip just detonated in D.C. A man stares into the camera and threatens the Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson, swear her in by Wednesday, or I release your Grindr profile and your IP address. I bring receipts. This isn't gossip. It's raw power politics. Chaos on tape. If it's true, a career could fall. If it's a setup, it's a betrayal of democracy. Either way, someone wants Johnson exposed, a meltdown engineered, a cover-up hinted, a collapse invited, like an invasion into private life to force a walkout. We dig for truth next, because what you're about to see could shatter Washington.
Hey, here's a message for Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Pay attention, bud. This is for Mike Johnson. If you're not Mike Johnson, you can keep scrolling, or you can stay here and listen to what I have to say. Hey, Mike, you have until Wednesday to swear her in. Wednesday. Or I will release your Grindr profile and your IP address. I bring receipts, bitch. You're not going to sit there and actively work against LGBTQ rights and democracy. It is treason. Yeah, I'm calling you out for treason. You have until Wednesday to swear her in and let democracy take its course, or I will release your Grindr profile and your IP address. Connects both to you, Mike. The choice is yours. Do the right thing. 'Cause I'm petty. And I'm not above this bullshit.
Tonight isn't about gossip. It's about power. Who gets to wield it? Who gets denied a voice? And how far one speaker is willing to go to stop a vote that might expose the truth. The viral rumor about Speaker Mike Johnson's private life is a shiny object. The real story is the deliberate silencing of more than 800,000 Arizonans and the use of delay as a weapon to keep accountability off the House floor. Here's the bottom line. Adelita Grijalva, daughter of the late Congressman Raul Grijalva, won her special election in Arizona's 7th District by a landslide almost a month ago. In normal times, she would be sworn in at the next available moment. That oath is not ceremonial fluff. It flips on the switch that lets a district actually function. Office space, staff payroll, committee access, the ability to vote on the floor and request federal help for constituents. Instead, Speaker Johnson has refused to administer it, saying he'll do it only after the shutdown ends and when the House returns to full business. While the cameras roll, AZ07 waits without a vote or constituent services. Why does this seat matter so much right now? Because Grijalva has said she'll be the critical signature, number 218, on a discharge petition to force action on releasing Justice Department records related to Jeffrey Epstein. A discharge petition is one of the rare tools rank-and-file members can use to pry a measure onto the floor when leadership tries to bury it. Cross the threshold, and leadership loses its calendar veto on that resolution. That's the pressure point Johnson is guarding. Arizona's Attorney General, Chris Mays, has now sued to compel Johnson to do the bare minimum: seat the person Arizona voters elected. When a state has to sue the Speaker of the House to swear in a member, we've crossed a bright line. This isn't normal. This isn't some minor parliamentary scuffle. It's a test of whether rules still apply when they're inconvenient for those in charge. And it's happening in the middle of a government shutdown when every missing vote and every day of delay hurts real people. Now, let's address the viral TikTok that poured gasoline on this fire. A user posted a video warning Johnson to seek Grijalva by Wednesday, or he would publish what he claims is Johnson's account on a gay dating app, along with an IP address. That is not journalism. That's coercion and doxing, and it's wrong no matter who the target is. The allegation is unverified, and outlets covering the uproar have said exactly that.
They haven't backed off on any of those demands, Sean. You had it right. They want to take hard-earned taxpayer dollars, and they want to give new benefits to illegal aliens. We eliminated that in our big, beautiful bill. They want to bring it back. They want to prop up NPR and PBS. They want $500 million. That's their demand in their counteroffer, to prop up the Corporation for Public Broadcasting again. We're not doing that. Left-leaning media outlets don't need to be funded by taxpayers. They want to spend $1.5 trillion on a simple 7-week stopgap funding measure so our appropriators can get back to the job of just funding the government. And it's really a crazy thing to watch.
Whatever you think of Johnson's politics, nobody should be threatened with exposure to coerce an official act. The truth doesn't need blackmail. The truth needs votes and records, not rumors. Here's what is verified. Johnson has repeatedly tied Grijalva's swearing in to the shutdown and procedural timing, while denying any connection to the Epstein petition. On camera, he says she'll be sworn when the government reopens. His staff calls the lawsuit a stunt. Meanwhile, Democrats from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to House leadership say the quiet part out loud. Keeping Grijalva off the floor keeps the discharge petition at 217. Power protects itself, and the shutdown piece matters. Every hour the government stays closed, real families pay the price. Federal workers waiting on paychecks, contractors who never see back pay, clinics that cut hours, small towns waiting on reimbursements. You've heard Democratic leaders say there were no shutdowns on their watch, and that Republicans are holding up affordable health care provisions as leverage. You can disagree on policy. You can't pretend those consequences aren't real. Zoom out. What's the pattern? First, manufactured delay. Declare that the House isn't in session, adjourn pro forma, and push the oath off the calendar. Second, blur accountability. Claim precedent. Invoke Pelosi, without acknowledging that the context matters, including the timing, certification status, and the stakes for a live discharge petition. Third, flood the zone with noise, brawl over who owns the shutdown, amplify culture war outrage, and let rumor fill the vacuum while the calendar stays frozen. Let's unpack the Pelosi precedent talking point that keeps getting thrown around. Johnson says he's simply doing what Speaker Pelosi did, waiting until the House is back in full session to administer oaths for special election winners. Here's the problem. The examples he cites aren't analogous to a month-long freeze-out during an active shutdown, with a live discharge petition hanging in the balance. Democratic leaders have publicly urged Johnson to swear Grijalva in during a pro forma session, something they formalized in a public letter from leader Hakeem Jeffries. While ABC News pressed Johnson as he invoked a so-called Pelosi precedent, there's also a constitutional backdrop we can't ignore. In Powell v. McCormack, the Supreme Court held that the House may not exclude a duly elected member who meets the Constitution's age, citizenship, and residency requirements. The remedy for misconduct is discipline or expulsion after seating, not preemptive exclusion. No one alleges Grijalva fails those qualifications. So when you strip away the spin, refusing to administer the oath looks a lot less like neutral process and a lot more like a speaker's overreach. Let's talk receipts. There have been bipartisan moves pressing for more Epstein records, committee fights, subpoena votes, even cameras rolling as leadership met with victims. You can question motives, that's healthy, but the mechanics are public. A discharge petition strips leadership of its monopoly on time. If leadership wants to stall, keeping a single signer out of the chamber is the most efficient way to do it. That's not conspiracy, that's calendar math. We should also be clear about another claim. Johnson now says he won't block a House vote to release Epstein records. If that's true, great, put it on the floor, today. But promises that live in press releases and not on the calendar aren't oversight, they're PR. The only thing that forces action is signatures and votes, and that's exactly what the discharge petition would compel, if the final signer is allowed to raise her right hand. You've seen the images. Grijalva at the Capitol, still rep-elect, speaking at microphones that should be hers inside the chamber. Democratic members marching to the Speaker's office. Senators from her state demanding basic fairness. Cameras panning. Staffers whispering. The door doesn't open. That is what obstruction looks like in real time. Put it next to Johnson's own remark. She'll be sworn when the government reopens, and you can see the lever arm he's pulling. People's representation on one end, his leverage on the other. And about that rumor, it's not just unverified, it's the oldest trick in the strongman playbook. Weaponize stigma to distract from governing. We can reject that tactic and still insist on transparency, on Epstein records, on shutdown negotiations, on the rules that govern the people who govern us. If you actually care about accountability for the rich and connected, you don't trade an innuendo about a politician's orientation. You demand the vote, you seat the member, and you follow the law. Here's what accountability looks like in practice. Seat Adelita Grijalva. Let the discharge petition rise or fall on the merits and the signatures. Bring funding bills that protect families' health care to the floor and negotiate in public view. Stop holding one district hostage to message discipline. If leadership is confident in its case, it shouldn't fear an oath of office and a clipboard tally. For the people of Arizona's 7th, this is about the VA appointment you can't get help scheduling, the immigration case stuck in limbo, the disaster paperwork missing a congressional push. Representation isn't symbolic, it's service. And for everyone watching the shutdown's slow burn, it's about whether leaders treat your livelihood like a chess piece. Shutdowns become bargaining chips, and the damage lingers long after the headlines fade. A quick primer on the mechanics, because the mechanics are the story. A discharge petition is not easy to pull off. It requires 218 signatures, recorded in public, and then a waiting period before the underlying measure can come to the floor. Leadership typically fights these petitions, precisely because they bypass the speaker's chokehold on the schedule. They're the fire alarm you pull when the door is jammed from the inside. In this case, the petition concerns the disclosure of Epstein-related records, an area where the public distrusts institutions for obvious reasons. That distrust is exactly why this should be handled in daylight and by the rules, not by rumor and delay. Over the last few months, committees have haggled over subpoenas and jurisdiction, and leadership has staged photo ops after meetings with survivors. Those are steps, but they're not the vote. In July, a House subcommittee even debated subpoenas to the Justice Department for Epstein records. In September, the Speaker stood with colleagues and victims outside the Capitol and talked about transparency. Those moments matter, but without a floor vote or a rule allowing a vote, they don't compel production. The clock, not the press conference, is doing the work.
Well, if you wanted to see the spot where the very first president of the United States was inaugurated, you have to travel a couple hundred miles north of Washington, D.C. George Washington actually took his first oath of office as president in Lower Manhattan on Wall Street in a spot that is now commemorated for that historic moment. For what turned out to be a brief, shining moment, New York City was the first capital of the United States of America for a little over a year. George Washington lived then not in a big White House, but in a New York City rental like so many millions of us have since that time. New York City in those days was, in every important sense, the center of the United States of America. And for a brief, shining moment today, New York City was, in a sense, the center of our political world once again. Two guys from Brooklyn and a guy from Queens walk into a room to discuss the immediate future of the government of the United States of America. It's all up to them. If those three New Yorkers reach an agreement, the government continues its normal operations. If they don't, the government shuts down. They didn't reach an agreement today. And so we are now 26 hours away from Donald Trump's next shutdown of the American government. The last time the government shut down was the last time Donald Trump was president. One of the guys from Brooklyn reminded the guy from Queens that there were no government shutdowns when Joe Biden and the Democrats were in charge.
When I was leader, we negotiated 4 times with Republicans, and we never had a shutdown. And so it's up to the Republicans whether they want a shutdown or not.
The two guys from Brooklyn tried to explain to the guy from Queens that he was hurting people who cannot afford dramatic increases in their health insurance costs. But trying to explain that to the guy from Queens isn't easy because he doesn't know those people who struggle with the cost of health care. The guys from Brooklyn went to local Brooklyn public schools. Chuck Schumer, now the Democratic leader of the United States Senate, is a proud graduate of James Madison High School on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn. Hakeem Jeffries, now the Democratic leader of the United States House of Representatives, is a proud graduate of Midwood High School on Bedford Avenue, about 10 blocks north of Chuck Schumer's high school. And Donald Trump is the rich kid from Queens who now occupies an Oval Office he has stained with the vulgarity of his obsession with gold, and he went to boarding school. Boarding school is not the place where you meet people whose families have trouble paying the bills. The golf courses where Donald Trump spends his weekends, including this weekend, when he could have been working on funding the government, are not the kinds of places where Donald Trump's going to meet people who have trouble paying for their health insurance.
He laid out to the president some of the consequences of what's happening in health care. And by his face and by the way he looked, I think he heard about them for the first time. the closing of rural hospitals, the fact that so many clinics are closing. And I don't know if he knew this before.
Of course he heard it for the first time. Of course he couldn't possibly have known it before. Or he would have taken the situation more seriously, right? He wouldn't have spent the weekend doing absolutely no governing work whatsoever. He wouldn't have canceled the first meeting that he had scheduled with those two guys from Brooklyn last week. Would Donald Trump have spent Saturday slumped in a golf cart, exhausted, while playing golf with his granddaughter? If Donald Trump knew what was at stake in the funding of the government, would he have been posting on social media, sending out a quote, all necessary troops, this is what he said, all necessary troops to protect a ravaged war area? Ukraine? Gaza? No. Donald Trump tweeted about sending 200 National Guard troops, quote, to protect war-ravaged Portland. Portland has never been war-ravaged. No part of the United States of America has been war-ravaged since Abraham Lincoln was president, and the Confederate States that now so enthusiastically support Donald Trump were making war against the United States of America. Of course, if Donald Trump thinks Portland is war-ravaged, then his cognitive decline has reached very, very, very high speed, and it's getting faster every day. There was other evidence of that dramatic cognitive decline this weekend when Donald Trump should have been concerned about how to keep the government running, and he was instead tweeting an imaginary image of firing someone he cannot fire. There's Donald Trump.
Now, the Pelosi precedent. It's true that speakers have sometimes waited for the chamber's regular return to swear in special election winners. But it's also true that speakers, including Johnson himself, have sworn in members within a day of their election when it suited the majority's agenda. What makes the current situation different isn't the existence of a calendar. It's the weaponization of the calendar during a shutdown. With a live petition one signature short, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries has publicly demanded a pro forma swearing in. Johnson has publicly linked the oath to ending the shutdown. That's not neutral procedure. That's leverage dressed up as precedent. Let's talk about who lives in AZ-07, because this isn't an abstract fight. Tucson area families balancing rent and groceries. Border communities relying on federal partnerships for public safety and humanitarian response. Tribal nations that depend on federal commitments that don't always arrive on time, even in good years. The promise of representation is that when those systems jam, you can call your member of Congress and something actually moves. It's casework. It's a letter that gets your claim pulled off the pile. It's a phone call that shakes loose an overdue reimbursement. Without an oath, none of that happens. And for anyone tempted to shrug and say, well, the House makes its own rules, the Supreme Court has already spoken to the limit. Powell versus McCormack stands for a simple principle. If a member-elect meets the Constitution's qualifications and has been duly chosen, the House cannot refuse to seat them as a way to impose extra conditions or extract leverage. You can censure, you can fine, you can even expel with 2/3. But you can't pre-seat punish or pre-seat paralyze a district. That's the line between discipline and disenfranchisement. This is why the rumor is so useful to those who benefit from the stalemate. It reorients the conversation from the people's rights to a politician's private life. It invites partisan cruelty while the calendar quietly does the real work. It makes us talk about a threat instead of talking about the oath. We don't have to play along. The antidote is boring, procedural, and exactly what democracy requires. Take the oath, sign the petition, call the vote, and let the chips fall in public view. Let's close the loop on our through line. Authoritarians and their enablers thrive on delay, confusion, and distraction. Deny representation, blame the other side, turn a human being into a headline, and hope the public loses the plot. Our job is to keep the plot. The plot is simple. Voters chose a representative. The speaker is blocking her from taking the oath. That block keeps a transparency vote off the floor. And while we argue about rumors, the government remains closed and families pay. So remember the hierarchy of importance here. People first. Reopen the government without ransom demands that raise healthcare costs. Process second. Seat the winner, follow House rules, and let the discharge petition work the way the House designed it. Politics last. Let campaigns fight over talking points, not the right of 800,000 Americans to have their voice counted. That's not radical. That's the minimum in a constitutional republic. We don't need stunts. We don't need innuendo. We need votes and records. Seat her, open the government, roll the cameras, count the signatures, and let the sunlight in.